Good evening. The lost art is going to be discovered today, the lost art of encouragement. I'm Pastor John from Living Stones in Sunland, Tujunga Seventh-day Adventist Churches, and it is time for the call to prayer. Yes, in the book of Acts, chapter 11, right after Cornelius was baptized and his entire family was baptized, Peter was the first one called to the uncircumcised. Peter crossed a taboo line. Now Peter is in trouble with many early Christians who did not want people who were Jewish, that were not Jewish, as well as also the Jewish society and the temple. Peter had broken the rules. He had baptized an entire family, and he told them that he had stepped out of his zone because God called them. I cannot stand in the way of God. If you'll remember 2 weeks ago, I said, don't stand in the way of God, right? He baptized them. Then the book of Acts in chapter 11, in verse 19, it goes back to Stephen and how Stephen was stoned. And if you'll remember, there was a man named Saul. Saul had taken part in the killing of Stephen, and then he had breathed out insults. This was back in an earlier episode in the book of Acts. And he was going on, you remember, to Damascus, and then Jesus called him. He was blinded. His sight was given back as Ananias baptizes him. He came to know Christ. Well, all of this story was still going on, but that's over in Damascus, where Peter's over in the south. Well, as that persecution enlarged, many believers ran from Jerusalem, and they went out toward a place called Antioch. And that persecution had moved, and it had gone through Cyprus and all these different locations where many of the Jewish authority, many of the Judean authority, or those with the temple, the Sadducees and Pharisees, but especially Sadducees, wanted to stamp out this new religion following Christ. Well, there was a man named Barnabas. His name, Bar, in Aramaic means son of, Nabas, encouragement. Son of encouragement. You know, I believe Barnabas was one of them called Justus earlier in the book of Acts. I believe he was a part of the group that could have been the 12th apostle. As in Matthias, remember Matthias? Of course, we know that Paul was God's choice as the 12th apostle, or Saul, when God brought him over to Paul. But Barnabas comes along, and he wants to encourage those people that are over in Antioch, and he proceeds to find a man that is very strange. This man was named Saul. He had gone to Jerusalem. In the book of Galatians, we kind of have his story firsthand. He tells it that he went to Damascus. Remember, he was baptized, and then he went into Arabia to go to the mountain of God, the real Mount Sinai, and he came back, and then he started preaching, and the authority there in Damascus started to get after him. It's always been illegal to truly preach the gospel, except in the modern age of freedom, which those freedoms are going away, but that's an aside note. And so Saul is lowered down out of the basket of the wall of Damascus, and he goes back. He goes to Jerusalem. He sees James and Peter, and they say, you need to study. It's hard for them to ask Saul to be a leader of the Christian people that God called when that person was just killing Christians. So he's like hands off. Well, a man named Barnabas comes along. Now, in the meantime, Saul then had gone back to Tarshish, his place of origin. And in verse 23 of chapter 11 in Acts, then Barnabas went to Tarshish to look for Saul. And when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. So for a whole year, Barnabas and Saul met with the church and taught great numbers of people. The disciples were called Christians for the very first time in Antioch. What a powerful moment. Imagine if a guy like Osama bin Laden that took down, that masterminded the idea of taking down the World Trade Center. Imagine if he had somehow converted and then became an America-loving person. How many Americans would want to believe in him or even be on his side? You see, if I myself was someone that killed Seventh-day Adventists or Christians and persecuted, would you find it easy for you to just come follow me then? Of course not. Life happens. The reality is, history is what it is. But Barnabas, one of those rare people in the world, Barnabas, decides he is going to support Saul. He goes and says, Saul, you were called by God. I want you to help and be with me. The reason why Saul became Paul is because in Antioch, as Saul preached the gospel, and Christianity, or the people who followed the way, began to change their name. You know why the name was changed? Is because they talked so much about Christ. Paul spoke so much of Christ that people who did not know Christians said, you guys follow Christ, so we'll call you Christian. Wouldn't that be great today if we were so full of encouragement, if we were so helping others, and if we talked about Christ so much? Wouldn't it be amazing if this world just automatically would call us Jesus people or Christ people? Barnabas is one of the few characters in the Bible who is barely known but made one of the biggest impacts. So many of us don't like to be multipliers. We like to diminish others. It makes us feel important. Even the apostles, Peter and James, diminished Saul with good reason, because Saul had persecuted the Christians. I get that. But it takes a man that doesn't see what's on the outside, but yet he sees what's on the inside. Barnabas, son of encouragement. You know how I knew that? One of my mentors, Thomas Lemon, Pastor Tom Lemon, the first. He's in the General Conference now. He preached a sermon on son of encouragement. And you know why that's important to me? Is because Tom Lemon to me was an encouragement. When people didn't think I would be a good pastor. When people says, what kind of sermons is this guy? What kind of weird history does this guy have? And yet, he saw something in me. Just like Barnabas saw something in Saul, who was to become Paul. My friends, it's hard for us human beings to encourage others especially if they might be over us one day. It's hard to be a multiplier, one who multiplies talents and helps others and moves others to have a better life and does not regret letting them grow. So many of us are diminishers. We see the worst in others. Or, when they're getting something done, we always put it down. Now, it's true, there are those who we multiply and we help and we give all kinds of help to, only to have them turn around and bite us. But that is what mentoring is. To do your best. And then you pray that the character of that person learned what was right from wrong. I ask you to be multipliers, not diminishers. When you lead and you go through your life, let Jesus be central. Allow them to make decisions as they move forward. as long as they're not stepping on your decisions as a leader. Work together with others. Give them the best, even if sometimes they may not do exactly what you want. But in the case of Paul, I believe Barnabas was proud because Paul was the one that moved the gospel far beyond the gates of Judaism. The reason why we are here is because the books of the Bible that Paul wrote, which incredibly built our theological, philosophical, and real missiological structure of the church. My friends, be a son or a daughter of encouragement to encourage others to grow, become better. That means you tell them when they're doing something wrong. Doesn't mean you just let them do anything they want, but yet at the same time, you allow them to have their talents to grow, no matter what their history is, no matter what hits them. I want to be a son of encouragement. I want to be a Barnabas. May God bless you all. And now, remember, hit that like button. If these devotions or if this call to prayer is connecting with you, hit the like button. Share, like, and subscribe. Send it out. But also, in a few moments, I'll be meeting you again for the actual intercession, prayer for individuals, and for you to partake in that intercession. See you in a few moments.